I'll never forget that Halloween a few years ago. My best friend Katie and I were still on our post-college partying phase. We didn't need much of an excuse to go out, especially on Halloween, but that night we wanted to do something different, something that really captured the spirit of the holiday. Neither one of us had to work the next day, so we figured, why not? We skimmed through a few bars that were doing Halloween-themed events, but nothing stood out. None of them had that creepy, thrilling vibe that we were hoping for. So, we decided to head downtown and wander around, hoping to stumble upon something a little more exciting. As we walked down the street, we turned a corner and saw a narrow alley. At the end of the alley, a small group of people were gathered by a door, all wearing those old-fashioned plague doctor masks. I stopped in my tracks and nudged Katie. I asked her what she thought was going on there. She smiled and said we should go figure it out. We stood there, debating whether we should approach, when an older couple casually strolled past us and headed straight for the alley. Katie whispered that this was our chance. We quickly caught up to the people, pretending like we were with them. When we got to the door, the person in the mask nodded and handed us each one of the plague masks. The mask was cold as it slid over my face. Katie gave me a look. This was almost too easy. With no idea what to expect, we followed the couple inside. As soon as we walked through the door, I realized this wasn't some typical Halloween party. The room was set up like a makeshift church with rows of chairs facing a small stage. There were at least 30 people sitting down, all wearing the same eerie mask, their face hidden behind those beak-like noses. I whispered to Katie that this was really weird and that we should leave. But Katie, always the thrill seeker, nudged me back. She convinced me to stay a little bit longer to figure out what was actually going on. I reluctantly agreed, but insisted we wouldn't stay long. We found 2 empty seats in the back and sat down, feeling completely out of place. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the room lit only by dim candles placed along the aisles and on the stage. A few minutes passed, and then the lights dimmed even further. The only light left was the flickering glow of the candles. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the stage. They were wearing a mask like the rest of us, but it was red and far more elaborate, almost regal. The air in the room felt heavy as everyone stood up in unison. Katie and I quickly followed suit, standing awkwardly with the others. Without warning, the entire room began chanting in a low, rhythmic tone. It was an ominous hum, something ancient and unsettling. My stomach knotted, and I grabbed Katie's hand, giving it a tight squeeze. I whispered that we needed to leave now. Katie didn't argue this time. She squeezed my hand back, her face hidden behind the mask, but I could feel her unease. We slowly shuffled towards the edge of the aisle, trying not to draw attention. But as we reached the end, we were blocked by someone else wearing a mask. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, thinking for sure we were caught. The figure silently handed each of us a small cup. I stared down at it, the dim light barely illuminating the thick red liquid inside. It looked like blood. My stomach turned as I wondered if it really could be blood. I glanced at Katie and saw her hand trembling, the cup shaking slightly. That was it. I wasn't sticking around to find out what this was. I set my cup down on the chair and grabbed Katie by the arm, tugging her towards the door. We tried to move casually, but my heart was racing. Another figure stood near the exit, watching us. For a moment, I thought they were going to stop us, but I pushed past them, yanking Katie along with me, and bolted out the door. We didn't stop running until we were out of the alley and back on the main street. Breathing heavily, we ripped off the masks and tossed them to the ground. We stumbled into one of our usual bars, collapsing into chairs as we tried to catch our breath. We sat there in silence for a few minutes, trying to process what just happened. The whole thing felt surreal, like a twisted nightmare we just escaped from. We tried to talk about it, but neither one of us knew what to say. We never called the cops. What would we even say? To this day, I have no idea what we walked into that night, but whatever it was, I'm just thankful we got out when we did. My name is Jenny, and I remember that Halloween like it was yesterday. I must have been around 14 or 15, that awkward age where trick-or-treating wasn't cool anymore, but I also wasn't old enough to drive or do anything too exciting. It was weird. I didn't want to miss out on Halloween entirely, but I also didn't want to be stuck at home either. Selena, my best friend, suggested that we go to a small Halloween party that one of our classmates was throwing. I wasn't sure about it at first, but it gave me an excuse to dress up, something that I still secretly loved. After all, what's Halloween without costumes? On Halloween, I pulled out my witch costume, classic, I know, but it was always a solid choice. Selena apparently had one just like it, and we just happened to pick the same outfit. We laughed and we both ended up with the same idea and then set out for the party. A few minutes later, we arrived at the guy's house who was throwing the party, Christian. I could hear music and muffled voices inside. We knocked on the door. Christian opened it quickly, dressed as some kind of vampire, and smiled at us. The party itself was small, maybe 10 people hanging out, some sipping beers and others playing games. It wasn't wild, but it seemed fun enough. After some awkward chit-chat and a bit of dancing, Christian came over and asked if we wanted to play a game. Selena and I nodded, and then Christian pulled out a box that made my heart drop. A Ouija board. I immediately shook my head. I had heard too many bad things about those. But Christian tried to convince me. I looked over at Selena, hoping that she'd back me up, but instead, she pulled me aside and told me to stop being a baby, and that it would be fun. Reluctantly, I agreed. I didn't want to look scared in front of Christian, or worse, Selena. So we went to a small back room with Christian and his friend Jack. The room was dimly lit, probably Christian's dad's office, with bookshelves lining the walls. Christian set the board down on the desk, and we all pulled up chairs. He lit a few candles, explaining that we had to keep our hands on the planchette the entire time, and most importantly, we had to say goodbye at the end. We all placed our fingers on the planchette, and Christian began asking questions. Things like, is anyone here with us, and what's your name? For the longest time, nothing happened. I started to relax, thinking Selena had been right. This was just a stupid game people use to scare kids. Then, Jack, being the idiot that he is, blurted out, "Where are all the demons?" Selena giggled, but Christian glared at him. He told Jack not to joke about stuff like that. That's when the planchette moved. It was subtle at first, just a slight twitch. I thought one of them was messing with me. But as it started to glide across the board, quickly spelling out hello, I could feel my pulse quicken. Christian snapped at Jack, telling him to stop messing around, but Jack swore it wasn't him. I looked at Jack and saw the genuine fear in his eyes. Selena laughed, still thinking this was all part of the game, but then Jack stood up, yanking his hand away from the planchette. We all yelled at him, reminding him not to take his hand off. Jack sat back down, muttering something under his breath. Christian immediately suggested we end the session. He told us to say goodbye and move the planchette to goodbye on the board. We all agreed. Christian started to move the planchette to goodbye, but before he could get there, it jerked out of his hands and shot to no. We all screamed. No one was touching the planchette anymore, and it began to move on its own, slowly spelling out something else. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach as I watched it glide across the letters spelling, I see you. I bolted out of the chair, Selena close behind me. We didn't stop running until we were back at her house, out of breath and shaking. Neither one of us said a word, but we both knew what we saw. To this day, Christian and Jack swear they weren't messing around with the board. And as for me, I've never touched a Ouija board again. Halloween has always been my favorite time of year. The decorations, the costumes, the spooky atmosphere, I lived for it. My house was always the most decked out in the neighborhood. Every year, I'd have skeletons, cobwebs, and jack-o'-lanterns lining the walkway with eerie sound effects playing in the background. Kids loved coming to my house, and I loved seeing their excited faces when I passed out candy. But last year was different. I had come down with the flu the week of Halloween, forcing me to miss work and, worst of all, missing out on celebrating. Despite feeling terrible, I wanted the kids to have their candy. I had already bought several bags of candy, and I was determined to not let my sickness ruin the kids' night. Since I didn't want to risk getting anyone sick, I figured I'd just leave a huge bowl of candy by the door with a note that said, "Take some candy, and please don't ring the doorbell." After setting everything up, I trudged back to bed, dizzy from the medication. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I started drifting off into a deep, drug-induced sleep. Right before I was going to pass out, my phone chimed. I had forgotten to turn off my Ring doorbell notifications. I groaned, rolling over to check it. The screen lit up, showing the grainy footage of tiny costumed figures shuffling up to the house. It made me smile, despite everything. At least the kids were still coming. I watched them grab their candy. I was thankful I could bring them a little Halloween joy, even if I couldn't enjoy it myself. Satisfied, I put my phone on silent and passed out. Hours later, I woke up suddenly. My throat was dry and my body ached from lying still for so long. I grabbed my phone to check the time. It was a little after midnight. I also noticed there were several more ring notifications, probably more kids coming by. Curious, I started scrolling through them. Nothing unusual, just the usual parade of princesses, superheroes, and monsters. But then I saw it, a notification from only 10 minutes earlier. I clicked on the video, and a figure appeared. Unlike the others, this wasn't a child. It was a clown, a tall, looming figure in tattered clown costume, standing eerily still at my doorstep. The person just stood there, not moving, not reaching for the candy, just staring at my door. Something about it sent a shiver down my spine. Why would a grown person be out trick-or-treating after midnight? And why were they just standing there? The clip ended before I could see more. No new notifications had come since. I hesitated, then opened the live view. I almost dropped my phone. The clown was still there, standing motionless in front of my door. The only difference now was that they were holding something in their hand. A knife. At first, I told myself it was probably just a prop, maybe some late-night pranksters trying to mess with me. But the sight of that figure, silent, unmoving, sent a wave of fear through me. The rational part of my brain told me to call the police, but the other part thought I should just use the intercom to scare them off. I pressed the button, my voice shaky as I spoke into the speaker. I said they needed to leave now, or I would call the police. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the clown's head turned towards the camera. It leaned in, its grotesque painted face filling the screen until all I could see was the distorted grin staring back at me. Then the feed went black. My heart hammered in my chest. The only way the camera could have gone out was if they broke it. I jumped up from bed just as a loud banging echoed through my house. They were pounding on my door. I ran downstairs, my pulse racing, but stopped just short of the door. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Instead, I pressed my face against the peephole. The clown's eye stared back at me. I screamed, stumbling back, my mind reeling. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands trembling as I explained the situation. The operator stayed on the line with me, trying to keep me calm. But I couldn't stop thinking about that eye, the knife, and then silence. The banging stopped. I didn't dare look through the peephole again. Instead, I sat on the floor, clutching my phone, waiting for what felt like an eternity until I heard a knock at the door. I cautiously looked through the peephole again, relieved to see that familiar police uniform. I opened the door, shaky but thankful. Before I could speak, though, my eyes caught something written across my door in what looked to be red paint, or something worse. It said, "I made you scream." The police took my statement, and I showed them the footage from the Ring camera, but it didn't matter. No one was ever caught. No one fitting the description of that clown was ever found. Halloween is coming up again, and I haven't put up a single decoration. The thought of it fills me with dread now, where there was once excitement. Because no matter what I do, I can't shake that feeling that this Halloween, the clown might come back, and this time, I might not be so lucky.